Concorde 04590, you have flames. You have flames behind you. These were among the last words heard from air traffic control before one of aviation's most beloved aircraft became a blazing meteor streaking across the summer sky above Paris. On July 25, 2000, what began as a routine charter flight to New York would end in less than 2 minutes, with 113 souls lost and the dream of supersonic passenger travel forever shattered. The elegant white bird that had symbolized the pinnacle of human engineering achievement was about to write its final tragic chapter in the most devastating way imaginable. This is the story of Air France Flight 4590, the day the impossible happened, and how a single piece of metal on a runway would bring down the world's most advanced airliner in a catastrophic fireball that shocked the aviation world. Before we dive into this heartbreaking story, if you're passionate about aviation history and want to understand the lessons learned from these tragedies, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Your support helps us honor these stories and the people who lost their lives by sharing the truth about what really happened and how aviation became safer because of their sacrifice. It was a perfect summer morning at Charles de Gaulle Airport outside Paris, with clear blue skies and light winds creating ideal flying conditions for what should have been a dream flight. The passengers boarding Concorde Fox Alpha Bravo Tango Uniform Zulu that morning were mostly German tourists, many of them elderly couples who had saved for years to afford this once-in-a-lifetime experience aboard the world's only supersonic passenger airliner. They had paid premium prices not just for speed, but for the prestige of flying on an aircraft that could cruise at twice the speed of sound, where passengers could literally outrun the sun and arrive in New York before they had left Paris in local time. Among the 100 passengers were couples celebrating anniversaries, friends taking the trip of a lifetime, and families creating memories that were meant to last forever. Captain Christian Marty, a highly experienced pilot with over 13,000 flight hours, sat in the left seat of the cockpit alongside First Officer Jean Marceau, who had logged more than 5,000 hours of his own. Flight engineer Gilles Jardineau completed the 3-man crew required to operate the complex supersonic aircraft. These were not novice aviators but seasoned professionals who had trained extensively on the Concorde's unique systems and demanding flight characteristics. The Concorde itself was aircraft registration Fox Alpha Bravo Tango Uniform Zulu, a 24-year-old aircraft that had completed thousands of supersonic crossings without major incident. This particular aircraft had flown over 11,000 hours and completed more than 4,000 cycles, making it one of the most experienced Concordes in the fleet. The pre-flight preparations proceeded normally, with all systems showing green across the complex array of instruments and displays that made the Concorde's cockpit look more like a spacecraft than a conventional airliner. The aircraft was loaded with 95 tons of fuel, necessary for the fuel-hungry supersonic engines that would consume massive amounts of aviation fuel during the climb to cruising altitude and the sustained supersonic flight across the Atlantic. Everything appeared perfect, as the morning sun reflected off the distinctive delta wings and needle-sharp nose that had made the Concorde an icon of technological achievement and human ambition. At 4:42 p.m. local time, Flight 4590 was cleared to taxi to runway 26, right for departure. The aircraft moved gracefully along the taxiways, its long, elegant fuselage and distinctive drooped nose creating an unmistakable silhouette that still turned heads even after decades of service. As the Concorde approached the runway, neither the crew nor the passengers could have imagined that a critical piece of evidence of impending disaster was already waiting for them on the concrete surface ahead. Unknown to anyone at that moment, a Continental Airlines DC-10 that had departed just minutes earlier had dropped a small but deadly piece of metal onto the runway during its takeoff roll. This titanium alloy strip, measuring just 17 inches long and less than an inch wide, had fallen from the DC-10's thrust reverser and now lay in wait like a hidden landmine on the runway surface. The strip was not from a Concorde part, but its presence on the runway would trigger a catastrophic chain of events that would unfold with terrifying speed and devastating consequences. At 4:43 p.m., Captain Marty received clearance for takeoff and began advancing the 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus turbojet engines to full power. The distinctive howl of the supersonic engines filled the air as 38,000 pounds of thrust from each engine began accelerating the 185-ton aircraft down the runway. The Concorde's takeoff was always a spectacular sight, with the four massive engines creating a thunder that could be heard for miles around the airport. During the initial acceleration, everything proceeded normally with the aircraft tracking straight down the center line of runway 26 right. The crew followed their standard call-outs as the airspeed indicators climbed steadily through the various speed markers that defined a normal Concorde departure. At 150 knots, First Officer Marco called out the speed as the aircraft continued to accelerate toward the critical V1 speed of 150 knots, beyond which the takeoff could not be safely aborted. But at that exact moment, as the left main landing gear rolled over the metal strip lying on the runway surface, disaster struck with shocking suddenness. The titanium strip was struck by one of the left main landing gear tires, causing it to burst with explosive violence. The disintegrating tire sent large chunks of rubber flying at tremendous speed toward the aircraft's fuel tanks located in the wing sections. One particularly large piece of tire debris, weighing nearly 10 pounds and traveling at over 300 miles per hour, struck the underside of the left wing with devastating force. The impact did not puncture the fuel tank directly, but the shockwave generated by the high-speed impact traveled through the tank structure and caused a catastrophic rupture in the number 5 fuel tank on the left side of the aircraft. Jet fuel began pouring from the ruptured tank at an alarming rate, creating a massive fuel vapor cloud beneath the aircraft as it continued to accelerate down the runway. The situation became exponentially worse when the streaming fuel encountered the white-hot exhaust from the number 1 and 2 engines on the left side of the aircraft. The fuel ignited instantly, creating a massive fireball that extended more than 200 feet behind the aircraft and climbing high into the sky like the tail of a comet. From the ground, witnesses watched in horror as the elegant white Concorde was suddenly trailing a tower of orange and black flames that seemed to engulf the entire rear section of the aircraft. The fire was not just burning fuel, it was creating a blowtorch effect that began to seriously damage the aircraft's structure and systems. In the cockpit, the crew immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong, as warning lights illuminated across their instrument panels, and the aircraft began to behave in ways that defied their extensive training and experience. The fire warning system activated, indicating flames in the number 2 engine, but the crew could not have imagined the true scope of the inferno that was consuming their aircraft from behind. Captain Marty was faced with an impossible decision as the aircraft approached V1 speed. Standard procedure dictated that once V1 was reached, the takeoff must continue because there was insufficient runway remaining to bring the heavy aircraft to a stop safely. But continuing the takeoff with a massive fire already raging meant taking to the air with a catastrophically damaged aircraft that might not survive more than a few minutes of flight. The physics of the situation left no good options, only degrees of disaster. As the burning Concorde passed V1 and committed to takeoff, the crew found themselves flying an aircraft that was quickly becoming unflyable. The massive fire was not only consuming fuel and creating drag, it was also causing severe damage to the aircraft's flight controls and hydraulic systems. The number 2 engine, closest to the source of the fire, began to lose power as the flames and heat affected its operation. More critically, the fire began to damage the electrical wiring and hydraulic lines that ran through the wing structure, progressively robbing the crew of their ability to control the aircraft effectively. At 4:44 p.m., just 1 minute after beginning the takeoff roll, Flight 4590 lifted off from runway 26 right, with a 200-foot tower of flames streaming behind it. Air traffic controllers watched in stunned disbelief as the supersonic airliner climbed away from the airport looking like a giant torch against the blue summer sky. The sight was so shocking that it took several seconds for the controllers to process what they were seeing and begin transmitting urgent warnings to the crew. Concorde 04590, you have flames behind you, came the urgent call from the tower. But by then, the crew was already fighting for their lives against an aircraft that was rapidly becoming uncontrollable. The fire was now affecting multiple systems simultaneously, creating a cascade of failures that overwhelmed the crew's ability to respond effectively. Captain Marty struggled to maintain control as the aircraft climbed to only 200 feet above the ground, far below the normal climb profile for a Concorde departure. The massive fire was creating enormous drag, preventing the aircraft from gaining altitude or airspeed normally. The number 2 engine was now producing minimal thrust, and the number 1 engine was also beginning to show signs of fire damage. With 2 engines on the left side compromised, the aircraft began to develop a left yaw that became increasingly difficult to control as the fire continued to damage the flight control systems. Flight engineer Jardinot was working frantically to identify and isolate the various system failures, but the rate of damage was outpacing their ability to respond. The fire was not just burning externally, it was beginning to penetrate into the aircraft structure itself, threatening the integrity of the wing and potentially the fuel tanks that had not yet been compromised. The crew could feel the aircraft becoming increasingly sluggish and unresponsive to their control inputs as vital systems continued to fail in rapid succession. The situation deteriorated further when the landing gear, which had been damaged during the tire burst, could not be retracted normally. The extended landing gear created additional drag that further compromised the aircraft's already marginal performance. With the gear down, the fire burning fiercely, and multiple engine problems, the Concorde was quickly running out of altitude and airspeed options. Captain Marty attempted to return to Charles de Gaulle Airport for an emergency landing, but the aircraft's condition was deteriorating so rapidly that completing a successful approach and landing seemed increasingly unlikely with each passing second. As Flight 4590 continued its desperate attempt to return to the airport, the crew received permission to land on any runway available, but the aircraft was losing altitude steadily, and the fire was continuing to spread and intensify. At an altitude of only 100 feet above the ground, and with airspeed dropping below the minimum required for sustained flight, Captain Marty and his crew found themselves in an impossible situation, with no viable options remaining. The massive fire had now compromised so many systems that normal flight was no longer possible, and the aircraft was essentially flying on borrowed time as it struggled to remain airborne. The Concorde's sophisticated flight management systems, designed for the precise requirements of supersonic flight, were never intended to cope with such massive system failures and structural damage. The final moments of Flight 4590 unfolded with heartbreaking inevitability as the burning aircraft, now at an altitude of less than 100 feet, began its final descent toward the small town of Gonesse, just northeast of Charles de Gaulle Airport. Captain Marty fought to control the aircraft until the very end, but with multiple engine failures, extensive fire damage, and critical flight systems compromised, the Concorde could no longer maintain altitude or controlled flight. At 4:44 p.m., just 2 minutes and 30 seconds after beginning its takeoff roll, Air France Flight 4590 crashed into the Hotelissimo Hotel in Gonesse, creating a massive explosion that could be seen for miles around Paris. The impact and resulting fire killed all 100 passengers and 9 crew members aboard the aircraft, as well as 4 people on the ground in the hotel. The elegant supersonic airliner that had represented the pinnacle of aviation technology was completely destroyed in the inferno, leaving behind only twisted metal and the devastating knowledge that aviation's most prestigious aircraft was not invincible after all. The crash of Flight 4590 sent shockwaves through the aviation industry and marked the beginning of the end for supersonic passenger travel. The investigation that followed revealed the tragic chain of events that began with a simple metal strip on the runway and ended with one of aviation's most devastating accidents. The accident demonstrated how a seemingly minor incident could trigger catastrophic consequences when it occurred during the critical phase of takeoff, when options for recovery are extremely limited and the margins for error are razor-thin. The investigation led by the French Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety revealed critical design flaws in the Concorde's fuel tank construction that made it vulnerable to the type of damage that occurred during Flight 4590's takeoff. The fuel tanks were not adequately protected against impact damage, and once punctured, the massive fuel flow created conditions that made fire almost inevitable when combined with the extreme heat of the jet engines. The accident also highlighted the dangers of foreign object debris on runways, leading to enhanced procedures for runway inspections and debris removal at airports around the world. The tragedy of Flight 4590 fundamentally changed how the aviation industry viewed the Concorde program and supersonic passenger travel in general. The extensive modifications required to address the safety issues revealed by the accident, combined with the enormous costs of operating such a complex aircraft,
ultimately led to the retirement of the entire Concorde fleet in 2003.
The dream of routine supersonic passenger travel, which had seemed so promising when the Concorde first entered service in 1976, was effectively ended by the events of that tragic summer day in 2000. The passengers and crew of Flight 4590 became unwilling pioneers in aviation safety, their sacrifice leading to improvements in aircraft design, runway safety procedures, and emergency response protocols that continue to benefit aviation safety today. The investigation also emphasized the importance of robust fuel tank design and protection systems, principles that have been incorporated into modern aircraft design standards and certification requirements. The technical lessons learned from Flight 4590 have contributed to making aviation safer for millions of passengers who fly every day, ensuring that their ultimate sacrifice was not in vain. Today, more than 2 decades after the crash of Flight 4590, the elegant white shape of the Concorde can be seen only in museums and static displays around the world, serving as monuments to both the incredible achievements and the tragic limitations of early supersonic passenger aviation. The accident serves as a sobering reminder that even the most advanced technology must be designed and operated with respect for the fundamental laws of physics and the critical importance of safety margins in aviation operations. The memory of the 113 people who lost their lives that day continues to inspire aviation professionals to pursue ever higher standards of safety and design excellence in their ongoing quest to make flying as safe as humanly possible. If this story has moved you and you want to continue learning about aviation history and the lessons that make flying safer today, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the stories that shaped modern aviation. Share this video with others who appreciate the importance of understanding these tragic events and honoring those who lost their lives in the pursuit of safer skies for everyone. Your engagement helps us continue telling these important stories and ensuring that the lessons learned from accidents like Flight 4590 are never forgotten by future generations of aviation professionals and enthusiasts.